In color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Marvin Kalb in Washington, George Severson in Saigon, Larry Pomeroy in Saigon, Bob Allison in Baka, Jordan, Don Webster in London, and Steve Rowan in Washington.
Good evening. With a total bombing halt now in effect, Hanoi agreed to an expanded meeting of the Paris talks on Vietnam. That clears the way for South Vietnam to sit alongside the United States and the National Liberation Front, the political arm of the Viet Cong, to sit alongside North Vietnam. Assuming the two new parties are willing to sit at the same table at this stage, there is some question as to whether they could have delegations in Paris in time for the next scheduled meeting on Wednesday. And administration officials warned today that even after four-way talks begin, the road to a Vietnam settlement could be long and rough. At a news conference in Washington, Secretary of State Dean Rusk went into detail about the situation as it stands now and what the United States expects from the communists. Marvin Kalb reports.
The Secretary implied that North Vietnam had given the United States specific private assurances that it would not take advantage of the bombing halt. But as though to make sure, the Secretary then prodded other nations, he had the Soviet Union in mind, to get busy and help.
Some governments and leading personalities have, over many months, undertaken to tell us that something good would happen if we would stop the bombing of North Vietnam. It is now incumbent upon all of those who have taken that view to make a maximum effort to ensure that their advice has substance in it.
If Hanoi changed its policy, making the bombing halt possible, the question was why.
We can't, of course, know everything that might be in the minds of the leaders in Hanoi in this present situation. I would suppose that they must be coming to the conclusion, if they have not already done so, that the prospect for a military success for them in South Vietnam is very remote. They've suffered very great losses this present year. There are very powerful South Vietnamese and allied forces in the South. These forces are not going to let the forces of Hanoi overrun the country. And I think that it must finally be dawning upon the people in Hanoi that they cannot succeed in their military effort.
The Secretary was asked about what compromises were realistic and possible on both sides. He quickly focused on the key question of mutual troop withdrawals.
One compromise would be for them to take their troops home, instead of leaving them in the South to continue the battle.
What would we do as the other side of that compromise?
Bring our troops home in accordance with the Manila Communique. Why don't we get all foreign forces, for example, out of Laos and have complete compliance with the Geneva Accords of 1962 on Laos? Why can't all foreign forces, including North Vietnamese forces, get out of South Vietnam? That isn't very complicated. It's utterly simple, and it's a very quick road to peace.
On everyone's mind was one large political question, with only 4 days to go before the election. Did the president stop the bombing with one eye on November 5th?
I think the answer to that is clearly no, he did not. You know that for over a period of many months, he's been importuned from many directions to stop the bombing of North Vietnam. And some of that opinion was based upon domestic political considerations from many quarters. You are familiar with many statements that have been made. And he did not do that months ago, weeks ago. He didn't because he was determined to deal with this question on its merits. When he took himself out of politics on March 31st, one of the reasons was that he felt that he ought to be able to deal with this question of Vietnam without regard to the internal political pressures that might be mobilized if he were to be a candidate. So he did not expedite the decision. He did not delay it for internal reasons. This matter has had a long history. First, of fruitless talks in Paris, where we were talking past each other. Then in July and August, we began to get toward the gristle of the matter. We began to get toward the real issues. In the middle of October, it began to appear that something substantial might develop that would lay the basis for a de-escalation of the war, including a stop of the bombing. Last weekend, that was clarified. The President made his decision when the situation was right for it, when the situation called for it. And finally, if you want to talk about internal politics, if you ask me what effect this will have on internal politics, I would say that I haven't the slightest idea. And I would doubt very much it would have much effect.
It is almost with a sense of relief that the administration now ponders the complexity of the upcoming negotiation. The anguishing decision to stop the bombing has finally been made. Bigger ones lie ahead. But those are for the weeks and months to come, not for tonight. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, Washington.
In all the excitement generated by the bombing halt, one very important factor generally has been overlooked, and that is that the U.S. commander in Vietnam, General Creighton Abrams, has full authority from the president to retaliate to whatever dangers he feels necessary. If the communists take military advantage of the suspension, he presumably could even resume the bombing. In the war itself, there was again only scattered ground action. But in the Mekong Delta, a communist mine explosion wrecked an American landing ship, killing 16 U.S. crewmen. 8 others were reported missing.
What causes my heartburn, my indigestion?
In your stomach, excess acid may build, and build can cause acid indigestion, heartburn, that burning sensation. But Rolaids, with its exclusive buffering compound, has thousands of absorbent particles. Each consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid, gives fast, lasting relief. Rolaids consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid.
Hey, Nick, Cap. Ah, Listerine. Does our captain have bad breath?
Captain has a date. Do you?
Well,
Why you guys take chances?
What do you mean?
Listerine kills germs that can cause bad breath, and it lasts.
Ready, Johnny?
And that proves my point, right?
Right?
Right. I see you guys learn fast.
Okay, Captain, you made your point.
And so did Listerine Antiseptic. Kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
Coming so close to the election, the bombing halt inevitably raised questions of political motivation on President Johnson's part. Today in Erie, Pennsylvania, the Democratic vice presidential candidate disputed this. In Senator Edmund Muskie's words, we ought to bear in mind that he paid a political price to achieve this kind of movement, and he ought to be given credit for a non-political motive. Here are other candidates' reactions. First, Hubert Humphrey.
I fully support the action undertaken by the President, his order for the cessation of the bombing of the North, as I am sure the vast majority of the American people will support it. Now let us hope and pray that the negotiations in Paris will be able to move forward now towards an honorable and lasting settlement.
Mr. Vice President, there are those who say that it might help your candidacy, this bombing halt.
What it does is help the cause of peace. And as the President says, he's taken this decision in the hope that it will reduce the killing and the danger and the injury on both sides, and that it can lead to prompt and productive discussions. This is going to help people. I don't think it has much to do with candidates as such.
As you are probably aware, tonight, the President announced another bomb halt in Vietnam. I will not comment on those talks that are going on in Paris. I will only say what I have said previously, that I trust that this action may bring some progress in those talks. And I will say further, my friends, that as a presidential candidate and my vice presidential running mate joins me in this, neither he nor I will say anything that might destroy the chance to have peace. We want peace above politics.
Let me say this, that on this particular announcement by the President of the country, I, like all of you, pray and hope that it brings about an honorable peace and an early cessation of the hostilities in Southeast Asia. And as long as this action is being taken, we ought to pray and hope that the action is going to be highly successful. And that's my attitude about it.
I don't think we have any choice but to back the president in his decision. Even though based on the information that I have, there are still some very serious questions left in my mind and ought to be in the minds of all of our country's citizens. I can only be pessimistic about the possibility of serious negotiations. The odds are that this is just another stalling tactic, and the time gained by Hanoi will be used to again resupply and re-equip their fighting men. Also, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that this is a deliberate attempt to influence the election by Hanoi.
In one immediate political effect, the bombing halt brought a reluctant Democratic Senate candidate into the Humphrey camp. Paul O'Dwyer of New York, a McCarthy supporter who had withheld his support because of the Vietnam War, today endorsed the party's national ticket. The Harris poll today reported another gain for Humphrey, cutting Nixon's lead to 3 percentage points. A nationwide public opinion survey taken Sunday and Monday now shows Nixon with 40%, Humphrey with 37%, Wallace 16%, and Unsure 7%. Harris's last previous survey showed Nixon with a 5 percentage point lead.
Just have a small wedding, you know. Maybe about...
Louise Hexter, start wearing cleaner clothes.
Sidney's proposing.
Besides, I switched to Dash, and my blouse is cleaner. Isn't that right, Sidney?
We agree. Your blouse is cleaner, but with new concentrated Dash, it'll look even better. We never thought the day'd come when there'd be a detergent better than Dash, but the day has come. There's new Dash.
Hi, only 1 tablespoon of Crisco oil. The lightest leading oil. It fries so grease-free that only 1 tablespoon goes into all these French fries. Huh? Well, watch. Take an exact cup of Crisco oil. Fry a pan full of French fries, then pour the oil back. And look, it all comes back, except 1 tablespoon. So get this Crisco oil with this new label and fry practically grease-free.
The bombing pause was acclaimed today by a number of world leaders, including Pope Paul, UN Secretary-General Thant, and President de Gaulle of France. All of them described it as a major step toward peace. But several of America's Asian allies, particularly South Korea and Thailand, were cautious in going along with the move. They said the United States should not hesitate to resume the bombing if North Vietnam fails to show good faith. As for South Vietnam's President Thieu, he was clearly unhappy over the decision, although he did finally give reluctant assent. From Vietnam, we have a report by George Sievertson on American GI reaction and on developments in Saigon.
President Johnson's announcement was broadcast in Saigon at 9 o'clock in the morning. Most of the Americans who heard it were not surprised, but there were varying opinions.
Well, as a soldier, I'd be happy if it brought peace, and I hope it will. As a strictly military sense, we're just hoping that by whoever works to get peace. That's what we're looking for.
Well, I think he's making a mistake myself, because I spent 10 months in the field up north, and I saw what happened the last time they slowed down the bombing, and I don't think it's the right thing to do, really.
I would definitely like to see everybody go back to the war, boy. This is no place for us to be, if that's my opinion. Us guys, we have no choice being over here, but we got to make the best of it while we're here. Too much killing and stuff.
The president's decision barely made a ripple among the ordinary people of Saigon. The 19th parallel, Washington and Paris, are too far away for most of them. For them, the war is much closer to home. Last night, only a few hours before the president spoke, 16 enemy rockets fell on Saigon, killing 23 and wounding 78. The worst casualties occurred at Vinh Loi Catholic Church. CBS reporter Larry Pomeroy reports.
For the parishioners of the Vinh Loi Roman Catholic Church, this was the day of the Feast of All Saints. So many members of the church had come to a 6 a.m. Mass that an overflow crowd knelt to pray outside. Then the first enemy rocket came. It slammed into the middle of the parishioners outside the church. The second rocket hit the wall of the church. 19 people were killed, another 60 wounded. There is no military value to this kind of attack, but the psychological impact is enormous. Now the people of the Vin Hoy Church know they cannot pray in peace. Besides being the Feast of All Saints, it was also South Vietnam's National Day, and the enemy likes to celebrate these occasions with a vengeance. Rockets fell elsewhere in the Saigon area, but this little church and its parishioners represents the grimmest damage.
The bombing halt over North Vietnam may take much of the terror and destruction out of the war for the people of that country. But for the people of this church, this day is a sharp reminder that the war is still going on for the South Vietnamese. Larry Pomeroy, CBS News, Saigon.
At the same time, South Vietnam's leaders gathered in the Independence Palace to discuss the new turn of events. Then they filed into a National Day reception for the Saigon Diplomatic Corps. President Thieu greeted the diplomats with a short speech. His remarks contained no reference to the bombing halt. Vice President Key, who was reported bitterly opposed to the bombing halt, was grim-faced. He stayed for the formal ceremonies and later quickly disappeared. President Thieu briefly shook hands with all the diplomats, including U.S. Ambassador Ellsworth Bunker. But later, while Thieu sipped champagne and chatted amiably with most of the other important ambassadors, Mr. Bunker stood alone. The president did not stop to chat with him.
In Paris, meanwhile, Saigon representatives gave no immediate indication that they intend to be on hand for next Wednesday's talks. And Viet Cong spokesmen were silent on their plans. U.S. Ambassador Averell Harriman said that when the four parties do meet, the first order of business will be to determine the procedures and the agenda of the talks. Retaliatory airstrikes began over the North in mid-1964, following that Gulf of Tonkin incident. Full-scale bombing started 7 months later, in February 1965. In Washington, Steve Rowan looks at the air war since then.
In the last 3 years and 9 months, more than 90,000 bombing missions have been flown over the North. At first, only hard military targets were hit, but later roads, bridges, convoys, and industrial power and petroleum complexes came under attack. In the same period, 924 U.S. aircraft worth many millions of dollars have been shot down, including 10 rescue helicopters. Of the more than 1,300 U.S. airmen shot down over the North since early 1965, 125 are confirmed dead, 450 were rescued, and 260 are known to be prisoners. The other 500 are unaccounted for. Almost 3 million tons of bombs have been dropped on North and South Vietnam in the last 45 months, more than used by the Allies in both Europe and the Pacific in World War II. 40 to 45% of that total, 1.25 million tons, fell on North Vietnam. The most recent step-up in the bombardment of the North involved the battleship New Jersey, but now her 16-inch guns will fire at targets below the 17th parallel. Steve Rowan, CBS News, Washington.
The bombing halt had little effect on the New York Stock Exchange. A small rally collapsed and prices closed lower. Volume was 14.5 million shares. The exchange index lost 19 cents.
I can't face those cameras today, Fred. Not with this cold.
I can't do it alone, Roger. Here, take 2 Bayer. We're on the air in a few minutes.
Okay, Fred.
Come on, Roger, we're on the air. This is the time of year you can almost expect to get a cold or flu. So be prepared to follow the 3 steps doctors recommend. First, rest in bed, like Roger here. Second, drink plenty of fluids. Finally, take aspirin to reduce fever and relieve aches and pain. Take Bayer aspirin because Bayer is pure aspirin, not just part aspirin. And aspirin is what doctors recommend. So for cold or flu, be sure to rest in bed, drink fluids, and take aspirin to reduce fever and relieve pain.
You know, Fred, I don't feel so bad now. That Bayer is amazing.
Bayer works wonders, Roger.
President Liu Shaoqi of Red China, the chief opponent of Mao Zedong in a 26-month-old power struggle, apparently has suffered his final defeat. Peking Radio reported today that the Central Committee of China's Communist Party has expelled Liu from all his posts, both in and outside the party. The announcement described Liu as a renegade and traitor for opposing Mao and hinted of a possible trial that could end in a death sentence. The broadcast also said that Mao must still settle accounts with Liu's accomplices, but gave no indication of their number. The UN Security Council was called into emergency session tonight to consider the new Middle East flare-ups. In the latest incident, Israeli commandos struck deep into Egyptian territory to blow up 2 Nile River bridges and a power station. Egypt said that several civilians were killed or wounded. Israeli officials said the raid was in retaliation for an Egyptian attack last weekend in the Israeli-held Sinai Peninsula. Earlier today, leaders of an Arab commando organization declared that they are going to turn every Arab man, woman, and child into a fighter for the next confrontation with Israel. And Bob Allison, in this report from Amman, Jordan, shows us just what kind of training Arab children are receiving.
They are called Ashbal, cubs of a lion, and they are told that they are the ones who someday will reach the sea. The sea is the Mediterranean, and to reach it they will have to fight their way across Israel. They are the children of the Palestinian refugees who once lived there. The boys are part of the long-range resistance plans of El Fatah, the most powerful and successful commando group here. Guevara here expects to be part of that drive to the sea. He can take this machine gun apart, assemble it, and fire it. He is 12 years old.
بلد فلسطين وفلسطين عربية وكانت عربية وما زالت عربية وستبقى عربية.
His country is Palestine. It was an Arab country. It is still so, and it will be an Arab country in the future.
Then you are going back to Palestine?
راح ترجع فلسطين.
نعم أرجع إليها.
He says yes, I will go back.
How are you going back, Guevara?
كيف راح ترجع لها؟
برجع لها بالكفاح المسلح. الكفاح المسلح هو أقصر طريق لتحرير فلسطين.
He says he will go back by armed struggle, which is the only and the shortest way.
This is no let's pretend game for Guevara and his friends. Veteran Arab commandos are teaching the youngsters their trade. Guevara is learning what these men have learned through raids on Israel and through training in such distant lands as North Vietnam, China, and Algeria. They are learning how, with real guns and live ammunition, under careful supervision of the commando instructors. One explained, it must be with real guns. That's what they'll be using. On the rocky slopes around Amman, the boys learn to travel over rough terrain. Rugged lessons with real hazards. A slip would end in a bad fall. This is painful. The side of this cliff is covered with a bed of large, jagged stones. To accustom the boys to gunfire, an instructor follows them down the slope, firing bullets into the ground. 20 years ago, Palestinian refugees started pouring into camps like this in flight from the first Arab-Israeli war. They have stayed on for 20 years, living on the promises of Arab leaders that one day the Arab world would restore their homeland called Palestine. Since the war last year, they no longer believe these promises, and they are taught and believe that there is but one solution: return of the land that was called Palestine. Bob Allison, CBS News, Amman.
In Athens, Aristotle Onassis said today he's about to make the largest single private investment ever made in Greece, $400 million, to build an industrial complex. Onassis, who married Jacqueline Kennedy almost 2 weeks ago, interrupted his honeymoon twice to complete negotiations on the deal. The project involves an oil refinery, an aluminum plant, a shipyard, and a group of tourist operations. New Jersey State Police say they seized $7 million worth of marijuana today after a dispute between 3 occupants of a car and a turnpike toll collector over 25 cents. The 3, a man and 2 women, all from California, were arrested. Police said 750 pounds of marijuana was in the car and a small trailer it was hauling. The 3 reportedly had asked directions at the booth and turned around, but then refused to pay another quarter toll. The dispute ended with their arrest and discovery of the marijuana.
To skier. It's a foot of snow to a boxer. It's a fast KO to a sheriff. It's which way they went to a smoker. It's a Kent. The taste of Kent. The taste of Kent. The taste of Kent. More taste, fine tobacco. To a jockey, it's a derby win. To a traveler, it's a welcome into a landlord. It's a monthly rent to a smoker. It's a Kent. The taste of Kent. The taste of Kent. The taste of Kent. More taste, fine tobacco.
If you smoke a filter cigarette, try the taste of Kent.
President Johnson flew to his Texas ranch today, where he will preside over honor ceremonies tomorrow for the 3 Apollo 7 astronauts. In Moscow today, there was a hero's welcome for a more recent space traveler, 47-year-old cosmonaut Georgy Beregovoy. Don Webster narrates from London via satellite.
Unlike America's recent astronauts, the Soviet cosmonaut required very little debriefing before appearing in public. All the top Soviet leaders were on hand at Moscow's airport as Beregovoy arrived from the eastern part of the country where his spaceship landed. Just a few hours before this arrival, the Soviets launched still another unmanned Cosmos satellite, the third in 2 days. But they said the current Soyuz series was ended. Despite 40-degree weather, a good crowd turned out for the welcoming parade. The Russians televised it live, and their telecast included orchestra music that made it seem like something out of Aida. The cosmonaut received a promotion to Major General and at a ceremony was awarded 2 Soviet medals. As far as is known, Beregovoy's flight set no records and achieved little really new. But it was the Soviets' first successful manned flight in 3.5 years. And this elaborate ceremony was a good way of calling the world's attention to it. Don Webster, CBS News, reporting.
That's the way it is. Friday, November 1st, 1968. This is Border Crime Kite, CBS News. Good night.
This is a report on a new advanced fluoride toothpaste. New Colgate with MFP. It is a report of clinical tests made on hundreds of children and documents the effectiveness of Colgate with MFP in reducing new cavities. A summary of this Colgate report is available free to any parent who wishes it. One of the mothers who read it is Mrs. Eve McDermott.
I read the summary, and it showed the results of tests made on children in Australia, Europe, and the United States. It's pretty clear to me that new Colgate with MFP was shown superior to the best-known stannous fluoride in reducing new cavities. I'm convinced it will really help. And the children all like its taste.
Write for your free copy of this summary to Research Center, Box 20, Mount Vernon, New York. Ask your dentist about new Colgate with MFP.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. You'll get all the